Hello and welcome to the Sex Within Marriage podcast. I'm JD from uncoveringintimacy.com, and we help couples build intimacy that strengthens their marriage. And today we're going to be talking about how to solve the mental load problem in a Christian marriage. And if you spent any time on social media these days looking at the topic of marriage, you have seen the posts. Usually a wife, exhausted, explaining to anyone who will listen why she has nothing left for her husband at the end of the day, and usually blaming him for not sharing the work. She's not just tired of the dishes and the laundry, she's tired from carrying the entire operation in her head. She's the one who remembers that their permission slip is due Thursday, that the kids have outgrown their shoes again, that it's her mother-in-law's birthday next week, that there's nothing thawed for dinner. She notices, plans, tracks, and remembers. And when her husband, quote unquote, helps, she's the one who has to notice that it needed doing and decide who would do it and ask him. She feels like she's not his partner in running the home, but rather the manager, and he is, at best, an employee waiting to be told, and at worst, another child to be minded. And the world has a name for this now. They call it the mental load, and the women describing it are not wrong. It's real, and it's heavy, and it's wearing them down to nothing. And before you check out because you're thinking, oh no, another post beating up for men for not sharing the mental load, hang on, because this is not that. Now, this topic has implications across the marriage, not just the bedroom, but we're going to start there because that's often where the first complaints come from. Like it or not, your married sex life is often a barometer for the rest of your marriage. And a pattern that I see over and over again in coaching is couples coming in to work on their sex life and ending up working on all the non-sexual things in the marriage that caused their sex life to suffer. Their physical intimacy problems either work themselves out after that, or at least then we've built up a firm foundation to tackle those on. So first, here's how this mental load is going to impact your sex life. So I've written many times that most wives do not experience desire the way that most husbands do. A husband's desire tends to show up on its own spontaneously, ready to go before there's any reason for it. A wife's desire is far more often responsive. It arrives after arousal has begun, after she feels safe, connected, unhurried enough to let her body catch up. She relaxes into it and surrenders into it. And most men tend to be the opposite. We don't relax into arousal, rather it drives us forward. And spontaneous desire is self-generating, but responsive desire needs to be woken up by something external, and it will not do that until the conditions are right. Now, just a side note, in some couples, this dynamic is reversed. It's not uncommon, even if it's not the average experience or the stereotypical one. So change the genders around as befits your marriage. But for the purpose of this article, we're going with the wife is responsive desire and the husband has spontaneous. Now picture the conditions of a wife who feels like she's carrying the full mental load. Her mind never clocks out. She is on call from the moment her eyes open until the moment they close, and often in the night between, especially if you have small kids. That constant vigilance is the exact opposite of what responsive desire requires. You cannot downshift into receptivity while your foot is flat on the management pedal. She's not broken, it's just that she feels like she's being asked to have sex in a room that is on fire. And some of this is just brain chemistry. Desire and arousal run heavily on dopamine, which is the brain's kind of motivation and reward and kind of adventure chemical. Stress runs on cortisol, and a body soaked in cortisol all day has been told over and over that now is not a safe time to relax. And the two work against each other. You're not drawn towards sex while your system is braced for the next fire to put out. And as I said, most women prefer to relax into arousal, which is not something that you can do on command, especially when your mind is still running the house in the background. This is one reason I so often suggest husbands learn to massage their wives, because it helps them get out of their head, let the day go, and ease into arousal instead of trying to force it. Because when they're not able to switch gears, when bedtime comes, one of two things tends to happen, and neither is what her husband was hoping for. And the first is that she has nothing left. She's not rejecting him, even though it can feel that way. Rather, she's rejecting the context. She is empty. She's been pouring out and deciding all day with no one to hand any of it to. And the tank is dry. And we hear this constantly in coaching. The wife who found it easy to be in the mood until their life shifted and brought a whole lot of stress, often in the form of screaming babies. And the one running on broken sleep with small kids does not need a lecture on desire, but instead for someone to take part of the load so that there's room for it. And it doesn't have to be kids. It can be a career and a home to keep up. It can be aging or ill parents. It can be a tragedy that struck the family. It can be anything that causes a lot of stress or needs a lot of attention. And the second possible outcome is even worse because it poisons a marriage slowly. Sex becomes one more thing on the list. It's one more person needing something from her. So she gives in out of duty and waits for it to be over and files the take care of my husband on the same ledger as pay the hydro bill. And sex should be the one place she gets to stop managing and simply receive. And instead, it becomes another job. And a job done resentfully night after night does not stay neutral. It sours into the kind of duty that makes a wife quietly resent the very person she's trying to serve. And most husbands never notice that they're doing this. If you need her to initiate, to plan it, to set the mood, to carry the emotional weight of your sex life, if you've made sex part of the mental load instead of a relief from it, then you have put the bedroom on her to-do list. And part of your marriage meant to draw you two closer has become one more thing she has to manage. And one wife summed this up in a single sentence when we surveyed couples about desire. She wrote, "Passive husbands are a wife's worst nightmare if she has responsive desire." Because a passive husband doesn't just leave the dishes undone, he leaves the desire on the tables as well. So, what does the world tell husbands to do? Step up, do your half, be an equal partner, carry your share. And the internet has even given this upgraded version a name. We call it choreplay. The idea of that doing the dishes is foreplay, that if the husband pitched in enough around the house, his wife would finally want him. And that is good advice as far as it goes. And a husband who refuses to lift a finger is definitely a problem, full stop. But splitting the load in half does not actually lift it. And every overwhelmed wife feels that even when she can't name it. Because think about what share the mental load equally means in practice. It means two people now have to coordinate, negotiate, and track everything together. Did you call the plumber? Could you grab the kids? Whose turn is it to do this? Every decision becomes a meeting. The tasks get divided, but the managing did not go anywhere. And she is usually still the one keeping the master list in her head, making sure that his stuff happens as well. And that endless negotiation is the heaviest part of the load. You cannot fix a coordination problem by adding a second coordinator. Two co-managers is still a committee, and committees are exhausting. As well, you have different preferences on how a thing gets done, and what the definition of done is different between the two of you. So even if you help as a husband, if she believes most of the nonsense the world is teaching to her about her preferences must be the right way to do things, like assigning morality to preferences rather than keeping them as opinions, then she's going to be double checking everything that you do and then redoing it again later, or complaining about how you did it and making you redo it again later. Or silently stewing about it and not telling you that there's even a problem. Like, how many spouses refuse to load the dishwasher anymore because they've been told too many times that they've done it wrong, and their spouse comes by and just redoes it anyways? And it's a flaw in humans that often we'd rather have something done the way that we want rather than have somebody else do it. Instead, I think we should take the approach Dan Martell does, who's a guy who writes about business. He writes that 80% done by somebody else is 100% awesome. So if dividing the load doesn't lift it, then what does? And here's where I'm going to get in trouble with some people, because I think when a wife says, I feel like I have another child to manage, not a partner, she's not asking you to do more chores or tackle a to-do list. She's asking you to take some responsibility off of her. When she says, I just want him to see what needs doing and handle it without me asking, she is describing almost word for word the difference between an employee and a leader. An employee waits to be told. A leader notices, decides, and owns the outcome. An employee adds to her load because she has to manage him, but a leader removes it because he carries it himself. And I think this is what biblical headship actually is, and it's almost the opposite of what most men do. Most men say, no problem, give me a list and I'll do all the things that you want. But they don't actually lead. They read Ephesians 5 verse 25 that says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And they, quote unquote, sacrifice by giving up their time and acting like an employee, asking to be managed, asking for a to-do list, asking for what they can do, asking how it needs to be done. And the help is helpful. No one is saying it isn't, but it is treating a symptom, not the actual underlying problem. I think most wives don't want to lead, and they don't even want a co-leader. They want to be led. The problem is most don't know how to say that. They don't know that's what they want. They don't know how to ask for it. And our society has raised them up to tell them that they don't want it. I'd also argue that part of the curse from the fall is that they will rail against this very dynamic that they were created to fulfill. Now, the objection I usually get from egalitarians is that the Bible says that the husband will rule over her because of the fall. That when God pronounces the consequences of sin in the garden, your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you in Genesis 3:16. People think that and conclude that the whole idea of a husband leading is part of the curse and something that we should be undoing. But that one word, desire, I think is the key. It's the same word God uses one chapter later, warning Cain that sin is crouching at the door. In Genesis 4, verse 7, it writes, its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. That is not a romantic desire. It is a desire to consume, to master and control something. So the curse does not describe the invention of husbands leading. It describes its corruption. After sin, the wife's good calling as a follower curdles into a craving to seize control, and the husband's good calling as a leader curdles into one of two failures, either harsh domination or cowardly abdication. And the battle of the sexes is born, not husband leadership, but the corruption and rejection of God's plan in marriage. Because the problem was never leadership itself, it's the failure of it on both sides, the husbands who will not lead and the wives who will reject it when they do. And abdication is every bit as much of the curse as domination is. A husband who refuses to lead is not being humble or being self-sacrificing. He leaves a vacuum and a vacuum gets filled. So she fills it by default because the alternative is chaos. And then she resents the load she never wanted and the man who left her holding it. And this is true even if she fights to have this power and belittles him for giving it up. This is one of the surest ways to kill attraction in the marriage. But unfortunately, we see it all the time. This is everywhere in our TV shows, in our movies. Anyways, the point is leadership in marriage was not invented by the fall. It came before it, and the evidence is all over the first two chapters of Genesis. God formed Adam first, and Paul points back to that order as a reason for how he structures the home in 1 Timothy 2:13. God gives the command about the tree to Adam before Eve even existed, making him responsible to lead and then teach her. Eve was made as a helper suitable to Adam's tasks in Genesis 2:18. And Paul says plainly that woman was created for man, not man for woman. Adam named her woman before the fall in Genesis 2:23, the same way he had just exercised his God-given authority by naming all the animals. And if you think Adam naming her woman is kind of rude, it's not. Adam is literally just means the man. There were two of them. They didn't really need names yet. They just need classifiers. Now, after the fall, even though Eve sinned first, God calls out Adam to say, hey, where are you? In Genesis 3:9. And scripture lays the fall at Adam's feet in Romans 5:12-19. Not because his bite of the fruit was worse in some way, but because he was the head, and the head bears the responsibility. And then after the fall, Adam again names his wife, this time Eve. So no, a husband leading his wife is not the curse. The curse is the struggle for power that breaks out when he leads badly, or stops leading at all, or she refuses to let him lead. And the gospel is the repair. A husband who leads the way Christ leads. Yes, sacrificially, but still leading. And a wife set free to follow without fear. And I think this is a relief that a lot of women are actually craving. And I think the world has kind of stumbled on this, or part of it anyways, without realizing what it found. Because if you step into the corners of secular culture that explore power dynamics in relationships, what they label as dominance and submission or power exchange, you will hear people describe something that should sound familiar to everyone who has read Ephesians 5. Ask a woman in those circles what she gets out of being the one who submits, and she rarely leads with the dramatic stuff. She talks about relief. She talks about not having to hold everything, the relief of trusting someone who else to carry the weight so that she can finally let go. And this is the exact relief that the exhausted wife says that she's carrying when she says that she carries the whole mental load. And one woman who answered one of our surveys said it better than I could, I think. She wrote that there is a great burden that comes with leadership, and there should be a great freedom that is poured out on the follower. The burden goes up and the freedom comes down. The leader takes on more so that the follower can carry less. That is not oppression, that is covering. And I'd argue it's the original design. It's what Christ does for us and what husbands should do for their wives. But we've gone so far from what God intended for us that that's now considered kinky and taboo. Another wife described what changed when she and her husband finally embraced a clear leader and follower dynamic. And for most of their marriage, she said sex had become duty-centered, something to endure. She said it was such a waste of time. Once her husband actually led and she was free to respond instead of manage, she became, in her own words, a willing, responsive wife who genuinely enjoyed their intimacy. And secular culture thinks it discovered something new. It did not. It backed into something our faith has upheld for thousands of years and called headship. It's the same human reality with two names. Being led well by someone who loves you is not a loss of dignity. It is a gift. Now, this definitely gets abused, so let me say this clearly. None of this works and none of it is biblical if the leadership is selfish or forced. Biblical leadership is an invitation to those that would follow. It is not pushed on them. The submission Scripture describes is always voluntary. A husband is told he will give an account for how he leads, and is warned in the plainest of terms against domineering over those in his charge. This is not permission to dominate your wife or to treat her as anything less than your full equal in worth and dignity. This passage has sometimes been twisted into wives must submit and their husbands must forcibly dominate, and that is a lie. Christ does not lead his church by force. He leads by laying down his life. If your leadership costs you nothing, it's not leadership. If your leadership costs you nothing, it's not biblical leadership. If you have to make people follow you, then it's not biblical leadership. It's just control with a Jesus sticker slapped on it. So, how do you actually solve this mental load problem? Because if mental load is the problem and leadership is the solution, then that leadership works on 3 levels, and most couples skip the first 2. The first step is to carry less. Some of it should not be on anybody's list. And the fastest way to lighten a load is to stop carrying so much of it. And before you reorganize who does what, ask an honest question. Does half of this even need to be done? A surprising amount of the mental load is self-imposed. The elaborate birthday parties, an activity for every child every night of the week, the commitment said yes to out of guilt, the standard of clean that no one is actually requiring of you. We treat all this as non-negotiable when most of it is a choice. And I often come back to a simple rule with couples that I coach. Do not do things for people that make you resent them. Resentment is a warning light that you have taken on more than you can carry in love. And a love that curdles into resentment has stopped being love. So whatever is quietly turning your heart against the people you are doing it for, that has to change, has to stop. Something is not right. And start with the kids, because that's where most of the invented load lives. And be honest about how much of what exhausts you is what your children actually need, and how much is what our culture has recently decided they should have. 40 years ago, kids were kicked out of the house after breakfast and not expected home until the streetlights turned on. They'd maybe come back for a quick sandwich at lunch and a drink from the hose, but that was it. Parents did a fraction of what we do now, and we grew up fine. 100 years ago, parents did even less, and the children were expected to contribute more, and they were fine. Go back 2,000 years, Jesus' parents traveled a full day back from Jerusalem to Nazareth before they even realized Jesus wasn't with them in the group. He was 12 at the time. They weren't watching him every moment of every day. They were the opposite of helicopter parents. We have invented a long list of things that children supposedly require, and then we run them ourselves into the ground providing them, and then resent our own kids for the exhaustion, and they get less of us as a result. Doing more for your children than you can do without resenting them or burning out is not the more loving choice. It is the less loving one. and they would trade every program on the calendar for a mom who is not burnt out and a dad who is present. Now, if you struggle to provide basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, love, then please get help. They do have some needs. It's just not iPads, noise-canceling headphones, and brand name clothing. And even Jesus did not meet every need in front of them. He did not heal every sick person in Israel. He withdrew to rest. He kept Sabbath. He let some things go undone. If the sinless Son of God did not say yes to everything, then you do not have to either. And as a side note, most of the men I know in ministry don't keep a Sabbath. They are burnt out. It is no wonder why. We don't do ourselves favors when we violate God's commands and don't experience his rest ourselves while trying to teach others that God's burden is light. And wives, the same rule lands on you. If you are doing something for your husbands that makes you hate him, the answer is not to grit your teeth and keep doing it while the resentment grows. If his laundry makes you hate him, stop doing his laundry. He can do it. If you weren't there, he'd learn to do it. But don't stop there, because that resentment is information. Ask where it's coming from. If you both work careers, the household split might need to be renegotiated. If one of you earns and the other one keeps the home, then fit the real work into the hours you actually have in a way that still leaves both of you room to rest and connect in the evenings or the mornings or whatever your schedule is. If the honest math doesn't work, if there's no way to fit it all into one day and still have a marriage, then one of two things is true. You have too much going on, or you need more help. Whether it's from him or from the outside, a housekeeper, a sitter, whatever fits your life and budget, that is yours to work out together. What is not fair is to load your own plate past where you can carry and then demand your spouse carry the overflow. If the resentment comes from commitments you choose, the honest move is to cut them or get help, not to hand your spouse the bill for your decisions. And I know that cuts a lot against what gets said online and sometimes in our churches, but fairness runs in both directions. Which brings it back, I think, to the husband. For husbands, I think this is the first place you can lead, by being the one with the courage to look at the calendar and say, we are doing too much and some of this is coming off. Because a wife buried under obligations often can't make that cut. Not all, but lots of them struggle with that, because she feels responsible for every item on that list and is worried about what people will think. Most of the time, men are easier to cut things out, and that is leadership. Using the strengths that you have. You have to do that with wisdom, with compassion and love, but sometimes it needs to be done. The Bible is clear. Take care of your own family before you try to save the world. Level number 2 is get it out of her head and into a system. Every business has figured this out a long time ago, and most families never do. You do not run an organization out of one person's memory, and a family is an organization. Even a 2-person company doesn't keep everything in their heads. You build systems. You build shared calendars, shared task lists, a place where the recurring things live so nobody has to hold them in their head. And the reason we call it the mental load is that it's stored in somebody's working memory, often hers, all day and half the night. Move it out of her head and into a system that the whole household can see, and then you can actually set the load down somewhere instead of leaving it to rattle around inside one exhausted person's head. And I don't run my life out of memory. As I write this, I have more than 60 open tasks sitting in my personal task management system for today, and far more that are going to come up in the near future. I have another system for my day job. There is no version of me that holds all of that in my head, and I would be a wreck if I tried. When my day job is done, the task list gets closed for work, and I don't think about it until the next business day, because I trust the system. My mind is free. And your wife deserves that same freedom, and building that system and keeping it running is one more way that you can lead, especially if you have experience with those types of systems at work. It doesn't have to be complex. A paper journal will do, or it can be as complex as you want, as long as it works and people use it and trust it. And number 3 is own it. The first 2 are not enough on their own, because a system still needs an owner. A shared calendar nobody drives is just a list of things getting ignored. Cutting commitments still takes someone willing to make the call and absorb the disappointment. This is the part no app and no chore chart can do for you. So take whole domains off of her plate. Not tell me what to do and I'll do it, which only makes you one more item on her list. I mean, I own the finances now. You will never have to think about a bill again. Now, you have to figure out what works for your marriage. Some wives want to be informed, some want to be involved. My wife is far less stressful by not knowing really anything other than we're doing fine. So things like kids' bedtime is mine, start to finish, or I'm planning our anniversary and you don't need to know a single detail. Pick a category and take the whole thing. The noticing, the deciding, and the doing, and carry it completely. Ask what level of involvement she wants. It may be absolutely nothing, completely hands off. It may be, I just want to know what's going on. Or it might be, no, I don't actually want you to take it because I like doing this. And you can kind of use this as your test. Does she have to manage you or can she trust you? If she still has to check whether you did it, remind you of how to do it, or quietly redo it afterwards, then you haven't taken the load off of her. You've only relocated it. And the classic dodge is doing a job so badly she stops asking, what people now call weaponized incompetence. And that's not leadership either. That's abdication. And that's that curse instead of the cure. And for wives, this is the let go of your preferences point again, but now with a bit more teeth. If you want the freedom of not being responsible for something, you can also berate him for how he does it. Do that and don't be surprised when he hands it back again. This is that curse creeping back in. If you give into it, you will feel the weight of it. Also, don't accuse him of weaponized incompetence just because he has different preferences than you. That is not the same thing. And it's as underhanded as calling someone a narcissist when they're not. That's a pet peeve of mine. And do not stop at the household. Lead in the relationship. Lead the connection. And yes, lead in the bedroom. If you wait for her to initiate and carry your sex life the way she carries everything else, you've just handed it back to her. Too many men give up on initiating sex, leaving it to their lower drive, responsive desire wives, which is an incredible amount of pressure and responsibility for someone who doesn't naturally think about sex. And then they wonder why sex rarely happens. Because you made it a burden. You made sex another item on the to-do list. Don't do that. Leading her into arousal, setting the tone, pursuing her, building the safety and connection that she needs to respond, that is part of carrying the load too. She cannot lead herself into desire while she's still managing everything else. Even when she's not, it's still unlikely she's going to create that context on her own. That is your job, not hers. Now again, if your dynamic is reversed and she has the higher drive and more spontaneous desire, then this is going to need to shift. But I guarantee that she's still not going to want to be fully responsible for it. And this will cost you, and that is the point. You are not taking charge so that your life gets easier. You are taking the heavier load so that hers gets lighter. Now, when a husband truly leads, something happens to his wife that he may not have seen for years, maybe not since they were dating. She relaxes. The load lifts, not because the work has vanished. The bills still have to be paid and the kids still have to be fed, but because she's no longer holding all of it alone, scanning, tracking, and directing from sunup to sundown. And for the first time in a long time, she's not the manager of everything. She is cared for, and she can rest. And a woman who can finally rest, who feels genuinely safe and held and led, has room for something that she has not had room for in a long time, maybe. Desire. So, does the Bible have a solution for the mental load? It does, and it's the same one it has offered all along. The one the world is now fumbling towards in the dark. The great burden of leadership poured out as the great freedom of the follower. A husband who lays down his life and a wife who is set free to respond. That is not a chore chart. That is the gospel lived out in your marriage. And as always, our example is Christ, who said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And that should be our model. If it looks like something else, then it's not biblical. So husbands, go lead your wife. And wives, let him lead. See what life is like if you do. And if you need help figuring it out, shoot me an email. I would love to help you have an amazing marriage.